Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Testimonio with. We have a very special guest today, and I know her from a friend, a good friend of mine, a colleague. They were friends before, and she introduced her to the group. And once she started working at Mesa with us, I really enjoyed having this really small moments of conversations every time she or I would go to our classes or after coming back. And it was just a nice moment to take a break and have a conversation about our classes and our world. But it was really nice, and I really miss having those conversations with her. But here we are, and we're going to have a really nice conversation, catching up moment with her. And her name is Professor Ranmali Rodrigo. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the welcome. And yes, I enjoy our hallway conversations. They are honestly critical to my life at Mesa. Like if I didn't have that, it'd be a really different space.
I agree. I agree. I think it's those moments that we have where we kind of
Mhm.
share. Sometimes we vent and it's okay,
Yeah,
but that makes us feel like we're not alone, and that's
yeah,
amazing. So I
yeah,
really appreciate that.
absolutely.
Good. So we can start with the first part of the interview, talking about your childhood. What was it like, and if you know then that you were going to become a teacher.
Okay, so my childhood was I feel like it was unique. I grew up in Westminster, California, which is in Orange County. It's a neighborhood that is lower socioeconomically and not reflective of the stereotypes of Orange County as a whole. I was born in Los Angeles, and my parents were the first people in both sides of their families to leave the island. They're from Sri Lanka. And so I was also the first baby in our family born on foreign soil. And Sri Lanka is probably about 3,000 miles away. So it's not even like a close kind of thing. It was a complete kind of cutoff. They were brand new in this country. They went from a place where everybody looked like them to a place where nobody looked like them. And it was 1976. I was born in 78. So I grew up in the 80s in this world. And so our neighborhood actually, before I can remember, I actually don't think it was filled with immigrants. With my parents and a few others, I think that was the start of it. And so at a certain point, I distinctly remember white flight starting to occur. It wasn't gentrification because the neighborhood actually didn't get quote unquote better, infused with a little bit more money. Actually, through the growing of the Vietnamese community is how the money I think ended up coming in. But that didn't happen until I think I was in college. So at that time, it was really just white flight, not gentrification. And families moved
Hmm.
because they didn't like the changes that were happening. So I was obviously the only Sri Lankan, and I was the only person who looked like me in our neighborhood. The majority of our neighborhood over time, by the time I was probably in 6th grade, was predominantly Vietnamese and Chicanx families. And then there were randos like me. There was a Black family. There was a mixed race family. Multi families of mixed races in a house. Our next door neighbors actually. So it ended up being a really diverse community. The true use of the word diverse at the time, but not economically diverse. That was pretty much what kind of joined all of us together. But it became very complicated and weird because my parents are very staunchly Catholic, religious, colonization,
Yeah. Yes.
And so they needed to send me, in their mind, they needed to send me to a Catholic school.
Hmm.
So rather than go to the public school with all the kids in my neighborhood, they sent me to a Catholic school that was somehow in this neighborhood predominantly white. So that definitely then had this really contrasting, strange experience of how I was treated there versus how I was treated in my neighborhood. And then also the strangeness of when my parents would take me back to Sri Lanka, which I used to tell people happened every 3 to 4 years, but then I realized that's not true. My parents couldn't have afforded to take us that often. And that means I would have been there more often.
Right.
And when I think about the ages I was there, it's more like 10 to 15 years, something more like that. So there's a much larger break of time between my visits. But when I would go there, my first cognitive memories of being there, my family there made it very clear that I wasn't Sri Lankan, that I was American. So I was in this strange world where it seemed like I didn't fit anywhere, never, ever. So, and then in my elementary school filled with all these white kids, one of my distinct first memories was these kids surrounding me in the playground, and they just started. It was a group of, I don't know, it felt like 20 kids, in a kid's imagination, but it was probably 7 to 10 kids. But they were all around me, and they just started firing questions at me. Like, why is your skin that color? Why is your hair so long? Why do you always wear braids? Why do you have dots on your tongue? Why are your fingernails that color? Why do your hands look that old? And at being a child, I was answering the questions, but I think I was really confused. And I was a child who was really, I don't know if it's because of all of the things going on, but I was very internal. So I don't think I told anybody that this had happened, that these things were happening. I was kind of observing, internalizing, processing, and then not really kind of, I don't know. I don't think I was communicating it with my parents, but I don't think they would have been much help, because in the experiences I had with them, one in particular, I think I was probably 7. We went to McDonald's. My mom took me to McDonald's once a week, because we ate at home all the time. So it was my treat to be able to go and get an ice cream or something at McDonald's. And this woman came up to us and just to tell us that we should go back to where we came from, that we didn't belong there. And my mom didn't say anything. She didn't talk to me about it afterwards, and she didn't say anything to that woman. She did mutter to herself, and maybe I heard her talking to my dad. She was kind of yelling generally in the car on the way home, that woman should, how could she say that? That woman should go back to where she came from. She didn't even know how to even process or react. So she's just saying things. And so I think so growing up in that neighborhood was really strange, because I think at that time it was simultaneously really diverse, but people were angry about it and white flight was happening. Right. So, and then I was this weirdo that didn't have a larger community, so I was, I was trying to fit in with my different friends, who were Vietnamese and Chicanx predominantly. And then also, but then all of us were kind of in this white enclave. So it was strange. It was definitely strange. And then I think you asked, and did I know I was going to be a teacher? And so part of all of that immigrant stuff is no. My parents definitely expected me. They were all about the American dream, and I think that dream is capitalism. So they wanted me to, do what they perceived to be a rich kind of job, or something that would make me rich, which was a doctor, a lawyer, or a judge, not really kind of realizing that there are other things you can do, but like definitely they did not want me to teach. But at the same time, I was kind of groomed to teach. I was brought up in my mom's school. My mom was a preschool teacher, a Montessori teacher. And actually recently I was, because of all the uprisings, I have been going through it. And kind of doing a lot of self-reflection and research and I don't know, just trying to deepen my information for a variety of reasons. And my mom was one of many Montessori teachers. Like almost all the Sri Lankan women I know in the United States are all Montessori teachers. And the kind of training they got was not college. So my parents didn't go to college. They went to training schools, I guess. So my dad was trained, I'm not 100% sure, like he's technically, I guess one might consider him a self-taught mechanical engineer.
Wow.
He knows how to fix anything. But particularly he worked in Sri Lanka with like plastic molding machines, so molding instrumentation. And my mom was trained to be a teacher. But I had recently kind of asked her about the theory of Montessori, and she didn't know that. So it's kind of interesting that they were training these teachers to do, but they weren't giving them the larger knowledge. You know, they were creating that, if I had to guess, a class distinction. They were saying like, okay, you can have this amount of knowledge, but not this kind of knowledge. So, you know, she came here and was a teacher, but I would have to often go with her to school because they couldn't afford daycare, and also they didn't trust people here. Also, I recently thought about the fact that in 1976, it was the heyday of the Golden State Killer and a bunch of other serial killers. And so I also think my parents had this very messed up idea of American people and what that meant. Like, in their mind, when you say American, American means white. And even though I think they know that Black people are American, I almost think they kind of see us as in the same boat, I guess, in their mind. It's problematic, but that's what they think, you know? So they saw like all these American serial killers. And I think that also played into how like why I was in the school all the time. So like they didn't want me to be a teacher, but then that is what I was exposed to 24/7. Like nothing else. So I can't imagine how I would have ended up doing anything else. I tried, actually.
That is impressive. But, you know, just hearing you going through some of the experiences that you went through, it seems that there was a lot going on, you know, in terms of identity, in terms of space and belongingness. I think it's important too. You are an American, but you are born from an immigrant family. So I think there's a lot of layers to your identity. There's so many dimensions to your identity. And for you to try to make sense of all of that at a very early age is not easy. You know, when you have all these kids asking you all these questions, and again, you feel like, and you go back to your home country, or, you know, the country from your parents, excuse me. And then hearing those things from your family, it's just like, how do you make sense of all of that, right? But what is interesting, even on top of all of that, it's how your mother, in a way, try to protect you. And it seems to me, because the fact that she didn't respond or she didn't say anything to that woman speaks volumes, you know, for her. I think she's an educated woman. She had more, you know, education and more class than the woman that was yelling at you.
Yeah.
And I think in a way her no response has so much value, you know, so much
Mm,
um, response, if that makes sense to
mm,
what it is. But
mm.
so you said that you your parents were trying to make sure that you were in a you went into a different route, you know, to become a lawyer or
Mhm.
what was the other?
Doctor
Doctor, yes.
or a judge.
Oh, yes.
They thought it was a separate thing.
Yes, of course, you know, because
Yeah.
judge has more power, I
Right,
guess,
right,
you know.
right.
But I love the fact that even though they were very specific about what they wanted you to become, they're all those professions are professions of authority and power, you know. So
Yes.
I love that. I love that they saw you, even though you know you have a different um, identity. They saw you as someone who was going to be, you know, with some sort of power, but you ended up being a teacher.
Right, right. Which, I mean,
It does have power.
I was just going to say, it has a kind of power that we don't recognize, and it's dangerous to not recognize,
Right.
which we are all having conversations about the problematics of that power and that authority structure.
Mm-hmm.
But often we don't name it because
Right.
it seems so counterintuitive to the mythology of teacher, of noble
Absolutely.
teacher, to talk about those power dynamics. But
Mm-hmm.
they're so critical, especially in the current moment. You know,
Absolutely.
like I don't, I believe that now as teachers, we are called, part of that calling to teach is an interest in dismantling that power,
Oh yeah.
you know. And like the hippie side of me definitely thinks there is something that it's a calling to teach,
Mm-hmm.
that there's something ancient in that name teacher, you know. The idea of guru or teacher is ancient.
Yeah.
And I think that when you think about it in that way, you understand the weight of that responsibility. You are
Mm-hmm.
the holder of knowledge,
Yes.
and hopefully,
Yeah.
but you have the responsibility of spreading it.
Yeah.
And how you spread it now in 2020 is so critical. Because for me, and I think this is controversial, but if we keep doing it in the ways that we have been doing it, and I
Mm-hmm.
mean down to the details of how we have been doing it,
Mm-hmm.
down to we need to take out the broom and go into the corners of every room in our teaching house and take it apart and clean it and make sure that we are doing things differently. Otherwise, to me, we are actually reinforcing and continuing to build upon the history of white supremacy
Mm-hmm.
that has come to rest in the identity of teacher. I
Absolutely.
don't think that it has to be intrinsically there. And I don't think culturally around the world it's intrinsically there. I think here in this country, based upon our institutions, it is here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't realize it, you know, because their version of teacher, I mean, it has a lot to do with that being a patriarchal society.
Yeah.
Um, and the view of teacher as feminine, and the feminine being bad,
Mm-hmm.
powerless,
Right.
negated, unimportant, to just just take care of the children. You know,
Hmm.
that's all you can do. That's all you're good for.
Right.
And I think partially my mom maybe wouldn't verbalize it that way, but I do think she also understood that she didn't want me to become powerless in that way as well. You know, because I
Mm-hmm.
do think, again, it's unspoken. So much in my family is unspoken. I've had to observe and
Hmm.
infer a lot from what's
Right.
not said. And it's pretty clear to me that part of what she loves about this country, or why she wants to stay here most of the time, because they're retired and they could go back and stay there.
Mm-hmm.
But here she has a certain amount of power as a person. Simple things, for her generation, simple things like being able to drive, being able to hold your own money, you know, these very things that we take for granted, like in her generation at that time in Sri Lanka, that's not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So she had a very different life here than she would have had if she had stayed there. So I think, yeah, that power, I had never thought about it from that way, that I ended up in a teaching position, which is a kind of power dynamic. And that seems to be it. Maybe I always thought about it as money, but you're right. I think it was about power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and probably they didn't realize that either, right? Because it
Right.
was more about the money, but you know, money is power at the same time.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
there's a
Yeah.
little bit of connection there.
Yeah.
And I already can already see our topics for our next conversation, part two, you know, about identity, because there's so much complexity that you're bringing up about being a teacher, a female, and then, you know, an American. We call it the dash American identity, right? So
Yes.
that's another side, you know, another conversation
Oh
we
yeah,
should definitely.
another. Oh my God! Especially with all the research I've been doing, it is a whole other situation. This
Yeah.
Sri Lankan, South Asian, you know, especially how it relates to the Black Lives Matter movement and and right now the conversations happening between the Black community and the Asian community at large, and that historically problematic relationship that everybody's trying to kind of suss out. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's not just, you know, the Asian community, but also the Latino community too, because there's a lot of colorism and a lot of issues and perceptions that in the Latino communities exists toward, you know, the Afro identity. Exactly, because and we have a lot of that, but I think because of colonization, we kind of like don't want to see it, or do we kind of like not really, we just are more European, but you know, there's a lot of that. So I think there's a lot of mending happening, and hopefully.
Well, and I think you and I share that in common, is we come from these cultures that are very much informed by their insanely long histories of colonization.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just a short moment, it was a continuous, so much so that there's this loss of identity that happens so long over so much time. But then you and I get born with our color reflective, not of the colonizer. And so you and I, even within our cultures and within our families and in our communities, probably had a very different experience than someone who was lighter skinned, which then also caused, that's where a lot of my reflection also came from, was the rejection from my own mother telling me to don't go in the sun. She would put cold cream on my face and be like, look, see, your color's coming off. Isn't that better? Wow. So there was like that whole, Oh my God, it could go so crazy.
No, and you know, we should definitely keep these conversations for our second, third, and fourth portions of that coming up interviews.
I feel like you need a podcast.
I think this is going to lead into that, because definitely, you know, we're unfolding and coming up with really intense and intrinsic even comment topics, you know, because you're right, there's a lot of layers that we need to kind of dig deeply. But I do want to go back to your story, because you did mention that at some point you said, no, I don't want to become a teacher. But when was that moment where you said, yes, I think I'm going to be a teacher? Do you remember that moment?
Well, my first, I graduated from college and I said, no, I don't want to be a teacher. But that's what I got hired to do. That is the only resume that I got a call back for. And so that was the job I did. For 5 years, I was a special educator in a private nonprofit school. And so at that point, I was doing it. I was just teaching. I think this is what I'm saying. It's like, I didn't want to do it, but it was just coming out of me.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Like when I got a teaching job, which also, by the way, all through college, the majority, I obviously had to work while I went to college, and the majority of the jobs I started to be able to get was teacher's aide, teacher's aide, teacher's aide.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of the only English majors that was admitted to the Arts Bridge program in the UCs. And
Wow.
what that was doing was sending art teachers or, art students into schools that were cutting art programs to teach art. And
Mm-hmm.
so they let me be in the program because of my experience with teaching, even though, and my experience with art, but I hadn't taken any college level art classes, but they
Mm.
still let me do it. My experience from art was like high school. So again, I just always kept, so my first job was teaching, did it for 5 years. Then I went to graduate school. I started the teaching credential actually, because I thought, okay, forget it. All right, I'll do it. I'll just teach. That's what I'm going to do. But then I started the teaching program, and you'll find this interesting. I took the multicultural, the one requirement that you have to take, and it was so terrible and so racist.
Mm.
And the kinds of things I heard fellow future educators talking about, I ran. I'm usually in a fight or flight situation. I'm usually a fight person, but I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I cannot, if this is the people that are in this industry, I'm out. And that probably was just reflective of that moment and that class and what that teacher was developing in the class.
Mm-hmm.
But I switched and decided to do an English master's instead. And I did that again, thinking I'm not going to teach.
Yeah.
I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but I was kind of like, I'm going to do this because it's my passion and I love it. And then I came out, I taught while I was in grad school. I taught at SDSU, some lit classes over the summer, and then RWS classes, rhetoric and writing studies classes. So again, even though I was also working in the restaurant world to make money to put me through grad school, I still also was doing teaching gigs. But then when I graduated, I was like, okay, this is it. I'm not teaching. I'm going to try my hand at doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
But then I got into the academic publishing world, and worked in a sales job at a local academic publisher that made course packs, and hated sales. So then I tried working on the other side of that, which was, I can't remember, but like maybe like more of like the putting the books together kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The company was terrible, so I hated that. But then I ended up working as a technical writer because I was still like, no, I'm going to try to get this. I also was like, I'm going to get this writing thing going. So if I
Mm.
can get a daytime paid but boring writing gig that can then give me enough money so that I can just focus on writing, then I don't have to worry about it, because I didn't want to, for me, teaching is so consuming. It's my body and it's my blood. It's like I can't stop thinking about it when I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that that was the path. So then I ended up working as a technical writer. And then our shared dear colleague, her and I would continue, we've been friends since grad school, so her and I would always be meeting up, talking about our lives. And every time, even though I was not in teaching, I wanted to hear about her teaching. I wanted to know what she was doing. And, and that's where we'd have the richest of our conversations sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I think it was really her that she was like, are you done with this charade? Are you ready to come back to teaching? And yeah, and then it started me thinking, and I was like, what am I doing?
Mm.
I am supposed to be teaching.
Right.
And then came back to the community college space and
Wow.
did it not expecting to end up getting a full-time position. I was just going to reevaluate after adjuncting for about 5 years. But then, as I said, I really believe my path just put me here. And honestly, here is the space that I should have always been working towards getting to, but I didn't know that this space even existed.
Mm-hmm.
this very particular beautiful world of teaching that we get to do at the community college
Right.
level that I don't think you can do anywhere else.
You're right. You're right. And I love that everything that you planned didn't go as you planned.
Yes.
And I love it because we just had a conversation with a Professor Escamilla, Rosie,
Mm,
who also talked about, she said, I don't like to plan things because
yes.
at the end, if it's meant to be this way, it's going to happen.
Yes.
No matter how much you plan, no matter how, elaborate your plan is, if it's
Yes.
not meant to be, or if it's meant to be something else, it's going to go that way,
Right.
right?
And when you try to stick to the plan, um, you know, as at our core, as writers and artists and lovers of books and
Mm,
art, the thing I'm obsessed with in that is that relationship, that sacred space, that thing that happens when you as a person read the book or you
mm,
as a person look at the painting, and
mhm,
you are then having this relationship with this artwork that
mhm.
someone else created, and so I kind of think that's how the world is too, that if you plan everything, you don't get to have those sacred spaces that kind of come up naturally through the organic, through the unplanned, like letting the wind sweep you a certain way.
I love that. That's actually true. But it seemed to me that you had different opportunities or different moments where you were being exposed to teaching, but then you kind of not ignored it, but you was like, no, I'm
Yeah.
gonna go this way, I'm gonna go this way. But I want to back up a little bit more because I want to know more about your pathway. You
Mm,
know, your pathway from high school into
mm,
undergrad and then grad. So
mm.
you finished high school,
Yeah.
right? And then you decided, okay, I'm going to apply to this university for this major.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that process?
Yeah. So my path to that was kind of a non-optional path. So again, a whole nother other conversation. My parents were very, very controlling. So part
Hmm,
of how they were grappling with all of the things that they were grappling with and their histories was to then try to control me.
hmm,
So their expectation was for me to go to a college near home and live at home.
hmm.
Until then they could marry me off, that cycle.
Okay.
And so the purpose for me for going to college was to go away. I knew that was the only way for me to get freedom. So
Hmm,
I only applied to, I think, 3 schools. And for that reason, community college was never an option for me,
hmm,
because I was like, if I go to community college, that means I'm in the community and I will
hmm,
be living with them. So I have to do what it takes to get into some kind of go away school.
hmm.
So I applied to UC Irvine because they forced me to, because that one was about 15 minutes from our house.
Right.
UC Santa Cruz and UC Berkeley. So UC Berkeley, I didn't get in. I got the letter that was like, you can come up here and go to the community college and transfer. And I was like, sweet, I wish I could, but
Hmm,
they won't let me go up there to go to community college. So
hmm,
no. And so I went to UC Santa Cruz straight from high school
hmm,
into that college environment. And I actually didn't know anything about the school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I went in undeclared, which
hmm,
we used to be able to do, but I think that you can't do that anymore. Some of my students have told me that you can. I don't really know, but I went
hmm,
in undeclared and kind of just started exploring. But honestly, mostly what I was exploring was school in conjunction with myself. So one of the first things I did, so I couldn't wait to get to college because for me, it represented freedom of thought too. So I was really excited to be able to take different classes. And because in high school, the way I was treated in high school, again, I went to a Catholic high school, predominantly white. in my English classes, I was not chosen to read my essays aloud. You know,
Mm.
I always got C's on my essays, ironically, but I loved to read. In my free time, I was always in a book, and I was writing poetry, and I was writing like journal upon journal upon journal. But that wasn't recognized. And again, we can talk about, that's a whole nother conversation. So when I got to college, I was like, this is my chance to be intellectual and to be seen. And there was an African American film class being offered, and I had never, I didn't know that they had classes like that. And so it was a senior level class, but I petitioned to take it. And so what I was struck with in college was this ability to make your own schedule kind of thing. Like there was always a workaround, it seemed. Like if you really wanted to do something, and maybe it depends on the university. UC Santa Cruz was very student-centered before it was a thing, and, very cognizant of students of color and their needs and their desires. So I think when I petitioned to take that class, they were like, yeah, sure, take it. So I took that class, and it changed my life, gave me the words for all the things I had experienced for a lifetime that had never had words for. And also, once I had those words, it gave me that empowerment that I didn't know I was missing, but was missing. That confidence, like, oh, maybe I can do college. Like, maybe I do belong here. Maybe I'm not swimming upstream. Maybe there is a stream in this world that in this academic world that I can swim in. So it was like an academic awakening, but socially too. I was having a little too much fun figuring out my identity in college.
Yeah.
And so I had to transfer, so I decided to transfer, and I transferred to UC Davis.
Oh, wow.
When I went to Davis, during the time I was at Santa Cruz, I was still trying to please my parents. So I was still trying to find a major that would make them happy. Like, what is some middle ground between doctor, lawyer, and judge that somehow also allows me to be an artist?
Yeah.
And a creative. Like, that doesn't exist, but I was searching for it. So I transferred, and transferring, for some reason, gave me the strength to just tell my parents, like, I'm going to be an English major. At that time, it was too late to also do double major art and English. That's ideally what I had wanted to do. So I just did English. That's what I chose. And they didn't speak to me. So that relationship was killed for a minute, because I decided to pursue the arts. And so once I was at Davis was really interesting, because at the time that I went there, for some reason, there were all these student-led protests happening to try to get more faculty of color represented on campus, particularly Asian faculty. There was KKK presence on campus. They were putting their literature into all of the school newspapers, like slipping them in. They were attacking students of color. So it was a really strange time to be there, and I think also really heavily influenced, again, my thoughts of myself. So I was having a really hard time there, and I was probably having some issues with depression. I felt very alone there. It was a very different space than UC Santa Cruz was. I had no friends there, I was there by myself. And so I went to a professor who seemed like this like nice professor. She sold herself as this like, very progressive woman, this like white liberal, like, I'm student centered, So I went to her office hours one day, and I was just kind of crying, and I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, something is aren't right. I need help. And she got really cold and she did not help me. And so I pulled myself together as I always did. I had broken down thinking that I could go to an adult or an authority, but like, you know, in my life, I had always been strong. I had always taken care of it myself. So I just kind of pulled myself together and did that. Then I ended up going through my classes, and I ended up taking, it wasn't African American literature, but I took some class where I met Rashay Richardson. And she was one of the few Black female professors on campus. And she took me in without anything. I didn't have to cry. I didn't have to beg. I just had questions about class. And then after that, I think I was in her office on a weekly basis. I was in her office. I had to be a couple times a week talking to her, hanging out with her. And she just changed my life. Because then when I was thinking about what to do next, I was getting close to graduation. And I was like, okay, well, I guess maybe I don't know, should I teach? Should I go to grad school? Because of the teaching experiences I had had. And when I went into the counseling office, there was a woman there who, when I walked in, so I just walked into this building, and she said, how can I help you? And I said, oh, you know, I'm getting close to graduation. I'm just trying to think about my options. So I just want to learn more about these two career paths, you know, graduate school or teaching. And she didn't pull up my stuff. She didn't ask my name, nothing. She just said, oh, you should be a teacher. I don't think grad school is for you. And I was like, okay, you know, and given the hard time I was having, I don't think it registered. You know, when you're a young person of color going through all this stuff, you don't necessarily get it at the time. Because again, I'm always learning the language after and then applying it backwards. Right. So then I remember later on, I was getting close to graduation. My Rashay was asking me, Professor Richardson was asking me, what are you going to do? What are you going to be? What are you going to do next? And I said, well, I think I'm going to be a teacher. They kind of told me that I shouldn't really go to grad school. And she said, why? And she started asking me questions. And I said, and then she said to me, you're going to grad school, period. And she gave me a bunch of books that gave you information about grad school, because also she knew what I didn't know, which is I didn't have parents who went to, like, college was in their imagination what the American dream was. They didn't know that there was more, even though they were saying doctor, lawyer, etc. It wasn't part of the imagination that they handed down to me. So she kind of gave me the information, and then in the midst of, I just kind of carried her words with me through those years that I spent teaching right out of college. And then, and then I was like, yeah, she was right. I should have gone to grad school. I'm going to grad school. So it was kind of a winding path.
That's intense. It's just, I mean, I'm not surprised, to be honest with you. I'm not surprised. And you're right. There's definitely so much material that we could pull from this conversation to really dig deeply. You know, I'm wondering about why you were getting C's in your essays. I'm kind of have an idea.
Me too.
You know, and I think we could definitely talk about that aspect. But I just want to highlight and emphasize that you didn't give up. Like, you even, because, you know, I'm thinking like you as a student, and having these parents, you know, behind you telling you have to do this, getting those grades, you know, and especially in something that you love doing a lot, must have been very discouraging. But you continued. But then also, what I really appreciate about this experience is that you went into this class who was intended for senior college students who have, you know, had more experience in college, and you were like, I'm gonna go there, and you did amazingly well, and it was just a moment for you to say, oh, this is what I need to do, right? So I just love that. It's just like, again, it's everything, you know, put in place for you to go to that pathway. That's amazing. That's really great. So she, your mentor, your faculty mentor, kind of guided you toward grad school.
Yes.
How did you end up in San Diego State?
Oh yeah, San Diego State. I was 5 years working as a professional when I decided to apply for graduate school. So that whole process was brand new. I was shocked that it was so different than applying to undergrad. The purpose was totally different. And at the time I was thinking like, oh, I didn't know, really understand master's versus PhD. So initially I was like, should I be applying to PhD programs? And then I didn't understand that graduate school was about really honing in to the thing that you want to study. So you have to kind of know what the faculty are doing at the different places, and it takes research. So before I knew all of that, I just applied to some PhD programs the way one would apply to high school programs, and didn't get in. I guess, again, probably part of that fighter in me, I had read in one of the books that Rashay gave me, Professor Richardson gave me, that to like call and find out, like, see if you can find out any information about your application and why it wasn't accepted or what you could do better, and develop a relationship with the person at the front desk so that they'll give you as much information as possible. So I did some of that, and I got that feedback that was like, that the application wasn't focused. It was clear that I was just trying to go to grad school, but didn't necessarily have an idea about what it is I wanted to do. So then I think I read somewhere, or I thought maybe a master's program might be the better fit for now, see how that goes. But that was really daunting because that meant I'd have to take out more student loans. So undergrad was loans and obviously working. And so, but I don't know, I thought it was worth it because it's my education. So I took out loans. I knew I was going to have to take out loans, and I applied to SDSU, and I think a couple of PhD programs and maybe another master's program. And I got into SDSU. I don't even remember. I assume I maybe didn't get into the other ones. But I chose, so I ended up at San Diego State, and then happens to be, I did that same thing. I saw a class that was being offered. It wasn't typically something you take in your first year of grad school, but I wanted to take it. It was about race and ethnicity. And I emailed the professor and I said, you know, I'm from Davis and da-da-da-da-da. And the professor writes back and says, what? You were at Davis? I was a TA at Davis. And I said, oh, I was a student. And he said, who did you study with? Who was a professor that you knew? And I said, oh, Rashay Richardson. And it ends up, I didn't realize it, but he was my TA in college in my American literature class, and was a huge fan of Rashay Richardson. Wow. And on that said, okay, yeah, you can take this class. That's fine. I know that you don't have the experience of grad school yet, but like, come on in and take it. So also that connection ended up there. So state ended up being like, you know, the right, like that just like made me be like, okay, this is the right place for me.
Perfect. Again, it's all meant to be. It's just fate, you know, destiny.
Yeah.
Good. So then, so you, I guess I'm confused. So you got your master's from San Diego State or from?
SDSU, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and, because I transferred, my undergrad is half at Santa Cruz and half at Davis.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
So I know in San Diego State, usually they, well, I don't know if it's true now or when you were there, but they kind of make you have to choose whether you want to go toward literature or toward composition and rhetoric. Was that the case for you, or?
So when I first went there, that schism had just started.
I see.
So I think it had just become 2 programs at the time. So I had applied to the English program, so that is what I was in, the English literature program.
Got it.
So by that time, I think to be in rhetoric and writing, the comp part, you had to actually apply and go to that that place. But I would have given the choice, still gone lit, because
Mhm.
that's my
That's
heart.
your
That's
passion.
what I
Yeah,
did. Yeah.
exactly. Yes. So then you got your master's degree, right? And then, but you mentioned already that you were already TAing, doing a little bit of
Right.
teaching here and there. And then I think we can fast forward now to the
Yes.
moment where you applied to community college.
Yes.
You got your first class, right?
Yes.
How was that experience for you? Walking into the classroom, seeing those students, how do you feel?
Terrifying, because I hadn't taught in at that point 5 years at least,
Mm,
um, if not longer than that.
mhm,
No longer, 7 years.
mhm,
And I didn't have, I still, for being a fighter, I just still didn't have that confidence. I still, like, I got into that class and I was like, what am I doing here? Like, what am I going to tell these people? These grown adults that know as much as I know. Like, I'm here, what am I going to teach them about?
mm,
And also what was so surprising is because I had come from that K through 12 experience, that it's just like, okay, here's this class, teach it. It's like, oh, what books, what, and it's like so creative, right?
mhm,
So also I was terrified that what I had brought and put together wasn't good enough, it wasn't academic enough, it was too simplistic, or am I doing this like a high school teacher, like, am I pulling too much from that K through 12 side?
mm.
And I went in, like, I thought I was being very hip, and I had these like super long nails. They were like neon yellow, and they coordinated with my outfit. So I just was like trying to do all this stuff to make me feel really confident when I stepped in there. But it was terrifying. But I think one of the things that has been consistent in my teaching, or I guess that has developed through my teaching, is that increasingly over time, I learned that it is most powerful for me as a teacher when I can just kind of be myself.
Mhm.
When I'm not trying to be a teacher, but I am being me and authentically me, and in that being honest with the students. So
Mm,
I think that I, maybe not on the first day, but I want to say at some point I said, you guys are the first class I've taught
mm,
in years. So I assured them I have a lot of experience, but I haven't taught in a long time.
mhm.
So I'm a little nervous, and so I think also automatically I was getting feedback as we were going, and I
Yeah.
was more open in terms of structure. Oh, and then I started to close the structure, and now I've become back open again. But like at the time, I didn't know, so I was
Mm,
kind of like, let's do this. And then now I'll ask them, like, so what did you guys think of that?
yeah.
And they'd be like, oh, we didn't really get it, or we didn't like it. And so, yeah, so the first class was really interesting and strange. And, but I always remember those students still. I
Yeah.
really feel connected to those students in my mind. They probably don't remember me, but
I'm sure they will. I'm sure they remember you, especially with your long nails, and that's probably the first thing they noticed. I'm sure.
well, because it was because one of them asked me about my nails.
They pay attention to everything, don't take
I
it for
know.
granted. They just look at every single thing you do or you don't do, then
Yes,
they catch on things,
that's
so
right. That's
um
right.
but what I'm getting from all of this is one of the comments you mentioned earlier is that you were trying to figure out a career or a field where you would be allowed to be creative, to be a lawyer, and to
Yes.
be a judge. And I think this is what
Ironic.
it is. Yeah, yeah. And even a doctor, because you diagnose this as you go. You're
Yes,
diagnostically doing everything, right?
it's true.
Yeah.
It is true. Isn't that so funny?
It's funny. It's amazing. It's how everything
Yeah.
just, came together to
Yeah.
this
I
moment of
know.
mhm,
It only took the entire span of my life up till this
Right.
point, but that's okay. That's okay.
Hey,
But the reality is, and that is really the truth, is that you have to let your path take the time it needs. You have to let your body and let your mind take the time it needs. You can't go by the time structures we've created. Like, you just need to know where you need to be in 4 years. Like, that's, it's not plausible for some, but
yeah.
for others,
But I think at the same time, culturally speaking, and it's not just particularly in this culture, but in many westernized cultures, we have this idea that a success is this way, very linear
yes,
and going up. But it's success, it's what you make it. But
yeah,
at the same time, the timing needs to be taken for you to get to the point, right? So it could
absolutely,
be a year, it could be 10 years, it could be a whole lifespan.
right,
But the things that you're going,
yes.
you're moving forward. So, and
Well,
I think that's what's happening to you.
yeah, and I think too, in this cultural moment, or right before this cultural moment, success was money and
Hmm.
some kind of title, right?
Right.
Um, Post COVID, I feel like we've all, post COVID, post uprisings, I think we've all had to take a minute and be like, wait a minute, what is success?
Hmm.
And so I've come to this place in my life, and I do tell my students this all the time. Like, I could have stayed in technical writing, which was a trajectory towards making a more, like, a consistent amount of good money. Like, then I'd become a middle manager in a biotech, make great money. But I wasn't happy, and I
Hmm.
wasn't fulfilled, and I wasn't myself, and I was falling apart at the seams.
Hmm.
And coming back to teaching, because I haven't been doing this for the long time, I was at the bottom of the pay scale. Like, if you've been adjuncting for a long time, like, there's like room to grow, but I started with a pay cut, and so a significant pay cut, and but was markedly happier, and therefore I would say I am now successful, making less money than I was before, with the particular title and accolades from the people around
Hmm.
me. So success, I think, too, has to be kind of reimagined and redefined,
Redefined. Yeah. Yeah, and adapted to your own life,
yes,
because
adapted to your life,
hmm
yes,
hmm yeah, because I do have cousins in Mexico who are surgeons, who are business
mm-hmm.
administrators, lawyers, judges, and stuff
Right.
like that. And then when I talk about like I'm a teacher, they look at me like, ah, like I'm sorry for you, like they feel
Yeah,
sorry for me, but I'm like, I'm fine. I'm
yes,
happy. I am comfortable.
right,
I'm living my life. So
yes,
I love that we're getting to that moment. But
yeah,
I also want to talk about something that you brought up, like your experience in technical writing, which I love
yeah,
because I feel like we should focus more on teaching students, sharing with students what real writing looks like,
yeah,
because it's to me, and again, this would be another topic for conversation for later, that and even I was very caught up with the idea that the writing is linear. It should be like one body paragraph and like
right,
the 5 paragraph format. And it's taken me and taking the students a lot of time to kind of redefine that idea of writing,
yes,
right? And I tell them that you will never see an article or an essay or anything like that in the world published written in
yes.
that way,
Well, I
right?
mean, let's even talk about the academic journals we asked them to source. The biggest shock of going from undergrad to grad school and, like, thinking I could write, and then trying to write my first graduate school essay. And I was like, okay, great. How can I fit a 5 paragraph essay? And
Hmm.
it's like, no, no, no.
No.
This is a 20-page paper. Get your life together.
Yeah, you don't want to see a whole page, just one paragraph.
No.
It's not gonna happen.
And stripped of creativity and
Hmm.
thoughtfulness, and they're like, Yes.
Yeah. So which leads me to this question, like, how do you approach writing? How do you teach writing? You know, having that background of technical writing and editing, how do you bring
Um,
that into your classroom?
yeah, I would say I privilege the process
Mm.
and editing.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to get my students to like celebrate all the things they've learned about writing up until my class.
Mm, nice.
These are all tools. You people have been putting tools in your bag, tools in
Yes.
your bags,
Yes.
tools in your
Yes.
bag. So you know how to write. I'm not going to bring anything new to this table. Like
Mm-hmm.
you know how to write. So now let's just spend the semester talking about the idea of identifying what your process is right now and how can you make that process, how can you develop that process towards a multitude of things depending on what you want to do. So one major thing you want to do as a college student is you don't have time.
Mm.
Like you don't have time to mess around and stare at a blank page for 30 minutes. You know, like you need to get your writing done. So how do you make your process more efficient so that you can get that paper done in the time it needs to take so that you really understand? Like, okay, so for example, I tell them part of my process is really walking around time. Like I don't write a paper on paper. A lot of the thinking happens first. So much of the writing happens here. So by the
Right.
time I'm sitting down to write, I have probably been thinking about that paper and the thoughts and the complexities for at least a week.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm planning to write something that has a hard due date, I need to factor in that week
Mm-hmm.
where I can just not write. Maybe I'm going to write a paragraph. Maybe I'm going to write a few sentences. I'm really jotting ideas really loosely, unstructured. Then I'm going to start. So what I'm trying to have them do is identify what they already do and how to make it bigger. I don't want them to change it, meaning they can change it, but if what they're doing really works for them, that's great. Then
Mm-hmm.
what we're going to spend the semester doing is practicing. So I also think about it in terms of my class, again, is not a writing class as much as an opportunity for us to sit together and practice writing with a coach present.
Mm. I love that.
So we're going to explore it. I try to give them assignments that allow them to experiment with form and doing a traditional structure, but I don't provide them with the structure.
Yeah.
Like they will ask me like, well, what do you want me to put in the first paragraph? What do you want? And I'll tell them like, that's the whole point, right? That's the thinking part of writing is
Mm-hmm.
depending on what you're trying to say, you know, what your main point of the essay is, depends on what you're going to put in the first paragraph, the second paragraph, the third paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, typically the first paragraph is an introduction, but sometimes people use the first paragraph to do a narrative.
Yeah.
That is going to give the reader ideas about what might come that is related, but they don't really get into the introduction until 2 to 3 paragraphs in. Sometimes it just depends on what you want to do. So I try to approach writing from this perspective that it's going to change for each individual.
Mm-hmm.
And so our class is a space of discovery, meaning not everything you're going to write is going to be good. There's no expectation for that. A due date is simply just a finishing date. It doesn't mean it's perfect on that date. And so that really comes from the real world writing where I tell them in technical writing, your due date is because the FDA needs this document.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that everything that needs to be fixed got fixed. In
Right.
fact, sometimes to hit that due date, we earmark things that need to be fixed in the next revision. Also, all of these documents are revised year after
Yes.
year after year after year. Like a document is alive and never ending. So you need to decide. Perfection is not what you're going for. We're
Mm-hmm.
trying to go for what are you communicating? What are you not communicating? Did it meet the criteria you were going for? Did it meet the assignment instructions? Because I do also emphasize that because like what you said in real world writing, the next time they're going to try to write something is probably an essay to get into college or get into a program. So, or let's say they want to get published. in any kind of magazine or journal that they want to get published in, they are going to have publishing requirements.
Mm-hmm.
You need to format this, this, and this. You need to format your email in this way. This is what the subject line needs to say. And sometimes that is the first thing that they'll be like, nope.
Yeah.
Next. So if you can't follow these instructions, it doesn't make you a bad writer. It just means that you may not be considered for stuff. So I try to make those real connections because of that experience with the technical writing world. And that in the technical writing world too, you're often sitting in a room full of experts.
Mm-hmm.
And they're giving you information, and they're like, all you do is get redlined feedback, like on a weekly basis, and then you have to change stuff, and you have to understand why you're changing it, because you need to be able to explain to them,
Right.
This is why I changed it. This is the history of this document. So yeah.
Nice. I love that. I wish I could take your classes now. I would have loved to learn that way of writing. But it took me a while for it. But I really appreciate that. You're talking about power and talking about like the dynamics of it. It seems like you're very comfortable giving them that power, that agency
Yes.
to make their own choices. And
Yes.
really it's critical thinking there if you think about it,
Yeah.
because by giving them their agency and making those choices about their writing, and the metacognitive process of thinking about what your choices, why you did these choices,
Yes.
is what these composition classes are about.
100%. Yeah, I'm always telling them, I don't give you, I'm not trying to teach you to write for me. And that's what's going to happen. I'm trying to avoid that like the plague. What
Right.
I want you to be able to do is take any class,
Yes.
get any assignment for the rest of your life, and be able to meet those requirements. That's what I want to do. So that's, if you're here for me to give you a lot of prescriptive stuff, I'm not going to do that. So I do also tell them in the beginning, this is how I teach, this is what it's going to be like. And really, there are no hard feelings if this does not work for you. You are welcome. There are other classes where we all get to teach in different styles. So, please feel free. Like, I want you to thrive in whatever way works for you.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about, speaking of doctor, like if you don't like a specific doctor because the way they're telling you how to take care of yourself, then you choose
Right.
another doctor to. It's the same with teaching. Like if you don't, if your personality with my teaching style do not go,
Yes.
feel free to choose some. Like this is the beauty of college.
And especially cultural. I know that for me, I had so many experiences in my life where I would thrive under certain types of instruction and I would not thrive under other types of instruction. And I do believe a lot of that had to do with my cultural knowledge. So I wish someone had given me that freedom to be like, look, I may not be, because I remember like this creative writing class I took in college. I felt trapped in that class.
Wow.
That woman taught from a very specific perspective. She liked a very specific type of writing from very specific types of people.
We don't need to get to that detail, right?
We only read certain types of example short stories and things like that. Anyway, she always made me feel like, again, like I couldn't write. I was terrible at it. My stories sucked. Like the things that I was talking about were dumb. And it wasn't her. She was doing her best. She was just speaking to me in a language that meant aggressive things to me. And I needed to be spoken to with a different kind of cultural sensitivity, I think. Because I was just taking the things she was saying in a certain way as an adult now looking back. And if I had just been able to take a different teacher, I think it would have solved the whole problem. I don't think she was a bad teacher. I think she was doing a great job. I think it was just, we were not working well together.
But I think it also speaks to that aspect that we just talked about in terms of power dynamics,
Yes.
I think for a lot of instructors and, teachers who come from a different not upbringing, I'm not trying to say, like from a different background,
Yeah,
um, it's really hard for them to really feel comfortable, allowing the student to bring in what they
yeah,
have to offer, their own experience and their background and their knowledge into the discourse that happens in an academic setting, like an English, writing,
right.
or which is, I know, ironic to me that I'm thinking about it now, the creative writing, like,
Yeah.
where's the creativity there?
But
You know?
yeah, I think she just really liked a certain style of
Hmm.
writing and a certain kind of storytelling,
Yeah,
and that's great. There were a lot of students that thrived in that class
right.
because they
Yeah.
told stories in a way that resonated with her,
Hmm.
So um, I think I tend to not be as linear and,
Mm.
you know, anyway, it was
Oh,
just
wow.
not, yeah, it was just not, it was just like you're saying, it was just two different ideas happening but like there was a power structure there, but also as a young person not realizing probably what was happening is she was reenacting some power dynamics that I had probably previously experienced in other classrooms, um, where I felt trapped and unable to be myself and write in a certain way, and therefore then struggling to find out what the formula is. How do I need to write in order to please you?
Mm.
And that certainly shouldn't be the purpose of, because then what am I learning in that space, particularly like you're saying in a creative writing class,
Right.
you know?
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, again, we can go on and on
Yeah.
about this, but I kind of want us to bring us back
Yeah.
into, your trajectory as a professor. So you were teaching as an adjunct, right?
Yes.
Part-time. For how long did you teach?
Um, a year and a half
Okay.
as an adjunct in the community college district. Yeah.
And then you were hired as a full-time, right?
Yes.
What was that process for you? Did you ever consider having or applying and getting a full-time position or?
Yeah, I left the cushy life I was living as a technical writer,
Mhm.
and came to the community college, yes, to teach, but also with the explicit goal of, okay, I'm going to teach, I'm going to adjunct, like I said, for 5 years, and then see. So that means that when I came in as a year one adjunct, I was already asking about what does it take? What do I need to do? What are the kinds of things that are on like that so I hadn't yet seen the application. I didn't know the process. I didn't know anything, but I started to gather the intel like, okay, you need to be taking flex. Okay. I'm going to take every single thing I can take, so I started doing that kind of stuff from, the first semester I could start doing that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I came in with the intention to try. But of course, as I started to learn more about it, by the second semester I was community college teaching, it started to feel like it was a pretty impossible thing to do.
Yeah.
And I started to feel like, okay, so maybe I'll be. So then I started thinking like, okay, well, it's okay. Like I think as each semester went by, I was like, I really like, this is where I need to be. So
Mm.
if that means that I am an adjunct, then that's what I'll do. I'm still going to reevaluate in 5 years and see if that's
Mm.
still what I feel, but that's what I'm going to do. And then I started throwing my hand in and trying out applications. And I think that came out of a conversation with a colleague or a few colleagues. And, it was a totally, again, talking about application processes like undergrad, grad, and then now this one, it
Yeah.
was, again, something you had to learn, like just the application, how to
Mm.
fill it, the kind of language that you should be
Mm.
thinking about. And that's how I learned, okay, you can't just go to these professional development. You need to now really learn, what does everybody else already learn? Where is the conversation at? And what are you doing as a teacher? What is your pedagogy? How would you if you had to write that down, if you had to express that. And I had never thought about it like that. I could talk to you all day about my thoughts on teaching, but not in that speak, in that language, in that particular way that was required in that space. So I started to learn that. And then those were like the practice rounds. And then the Mesa job came up, and I really kind of, it was one of those things where I was like, there's no way I'm going to get this because it's too early in my career, you know? So, but I was like, but let me go ahead and fill this out as a real dress rehearsal. Like I'm going to put all this effort into this application and see what happens. And then I got through the first round and I was like, oh, I got an interview. And then I was like, this is a fluke. There's no way. Okay, great. I did a good job on the application. So now let's see about this. And then I had a colleague who was in the know, who mentored me. And and then surprise, and then got to the final round, and I still was like, okay, cool. That was a great God, I'm so lucky to get that practice. And then when they called and, offered the position, I don't think I cried immediately. I think I was kind of more in shock. And then I started cleaning the house and Adele came on. And I just started crying because I think I was crying because it was the culmination of a lifetime of that feeling of not fitting, of not belonging, of not the C student, like you can't write, you don't belong here. Like it was the culmination of like, you do belong here. And it was overwhelming. Like even thinking about it now, it's overwhelming. I still feel that way every time I get to do this. Like, and when I think about that, I think about my students, and that's kind of where my teaching comes from, because I don't want them to spend a lifetime feeling that way and have to wait until they're 40 and they get, wherever they're going. Like I'm hoping that for my students, they get the language earlier, that they don't have to feel like an imposter for the duration of their lives. Like maybe they'll have moments of, they know they belong. They know that academics is for them. They know they shouldn't go to they know they should go to grad school. They should try to get that job that other people think is impossible, so yeah, that was that experience.
You almost made me cry because it's just, you took me back to the moment, where I got the same, like, very similar experiences, very similar reactions. And, and absolutely, it's just this moment where you're like realizing, wow, my hard work and all these years of feeling rejected or not part of something, it's, it's showing that it's not true. So I love that. And thank you for sharing that moment with us.
Of course.
So one of the things, as we come into a moment of closing this interview, which has been amazing and very fruitful, what are some of the challenges you faced as a college professor and a woman of color? I know some of the emphasis that you have in your classrooms are geared toward or are designed based on social justice, and decentralizing this colonization and the colonized ideology. But have you faced any challenges, and what those are, and how do you deal with them?
Yeah, I think my first sign that that's what it was going to be like was actually right after I got this job, and a colleague kind of offhandedly kind of said to me that they thought I got the job because of my color. And so it was like, oh, okay. All right. So now the work begins. And I think I have from students. I get that, and I'm of smaller stature. I'm a short person, and you know, I think that plays into it. But I definitely have students who ask me questions about my credentials,
Mm.
about my, it feels like my right to be there standing in front of the class. And I struggled a lot with what is the right way to deal with it? How should I deal with it? Because that is part of this space and this work. So initially, when I first started dealing with it, I thought, okay, what I should do is rise above it. I'm just going to focus on the writing. And so something that has happened probably every semester since I started teaching, starting with teaching as an adjunct, is I will get a student, at least one a semester in the class, who intentionally writes an essay that is meant to be some kind of lesson to me about race or feminism. It typically is a racist essay, an anti-trans essay, which is very specific, but I don't know why, but that, I mean, I do know why. Sorry, back that up. Or anti-woman or anti-feminist,
Wow.
intentionally. And typically written in like that rant kind of style. And it's typically a student where throughout the semester they had been playing with those types of ideas, but kind of coding them. And then in that moment where they know they don't have to see me again, I think is part of how that comes. And so previously I would just comment on the writing and think like, okay, great. You know, I rose above and I commented on the writing, and I'd be ignoring the reality that for me, it was, as an instructor, I am a human person. And it was having to see that verbal violence semester after semester after semester, and me just kind of being like, I'm going to be the bigger person, I'm going to take it. For me, I feel like now I don't think I was really doing anything constructive with that. And I think now I'm probably going to shift that practice. I think for me now, I'd like to move more towards not calling it out. I think now we say we want to talk more about the idea of calling it in. So actually engaging with that idea being represented in that paper and asking questions about it. Where did this topic come from? What made you write about this? Why did you only choose these sources? Why didn't you go and look at these other sources? And, you know, so it's not necessarily like, no, you can't. Well, it depends. So let's pretend that that's a paper that's truly just not intentionally hate speech. But I also, moving forward, if I get something that I do feel is intentionally hate speech or more on those lines, I would like to call it out and say, this is what I'm hearing when I read this paper. And this kind of language does not fit into our community guidelines. So I also want to, at the top of my class, like first page of when they come in, is have that very clearly laid out. In this community is based upon these certain things that we recognize, and there'll be a few things there. So this is not part of our community guidelines of respect. So you can rewrite this paper. That's it. That's your option.
Yeah.
You can rewrite this paper, or you can edit it to reflect something that, like, how, figure out, how do you take this out of that hate speech realm?
Right.
How do you change the tone? How do you, so those are your choices. Rework the whole thing, like just rewrite a new paper, or rework this, you know, to get it to where it needs to be. Because yeah, I just think like that is part of what I need to be doing moving forward.
That's a
Because of
good,
that power dynamic.
absolutely. So it's about that, you know, negotiating a
Yeah.
lot with that. And it's negotiating with, you know, your own feelings and
Yes.
rationalization about this. Is this judgment, you know, the
Yes.
judge in you has to kind of battle with the lawyer, you know, and figure out how to
Yeah.
be about this and how to go about that. But definitely, I think setting boundaries
Boundaries.
is
Well,
very important.
especially because I do think we are in this moment where we do need to proudly recognize that we are instructors of color.
Hmm.
And because of that, our experiences with a paper that is talking about race in certain ways,
Hmm.
gender in certain ways, things that are triggering us, expressing violence towards us in a coded way,
Hmm.
that we have to recognize that it is okay for us to be human. Sit with how that makes us feel, because every instructor that I have spoken to who has experienced this and also has those stories and those histories in their own life, typically they sit with that feeling and that ugliness for quite some time after those students are gone, after
Yeah.
that essay is closed. We might be talking about it a semester later, 2 semesters later, a year later. It
Hmm.
clearly affects that person, or it affects some of us as instructors, not
Hmm.
just instructors of color, actually, but some of us, it is a form of, when we are reading that, we are reading hate speech.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I'm definitely, I don't know. I think this will be an ongoing conversation too with
Yes.
fellow faculty, because I don't know that we've really hit the head on what we need to do. And I
Hmm.
kind of am hoping that moving forward, there could be more conversations about something that we're all kind of aligning as a unified department and doing,
Absolutely.
like a baseline.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you because usually the conversations that I've been part of and the trainings and workshops that I've also been part of have been focused on, you know, defining what microaggressions are.
Right.
And, you know, it's more about like how to avoid that. But
Right.
I think what we're missing is the other side, like the person who is struggling and experiencing these microaggressions on a on a daily basis. And faculty of color is
Yes.
part of that group, you know, and there's not enough conversation or support
Yeah.
that, and I'm not talking about a specific community college or
No.
institution, it's in general,
In general.
right? That there's not enough conversations or support, like I said, about that. So definitely we
Yeah.
should bring that up and, you know, and get this ball rolling.
Absolutely, because now is totally the time,
It is
you
the
know?
time. I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. Great. So with that said, again, we're kind of getting to the end of this conversation. What would you what would you give as an advice to that student who is thinking about becoming a teacher but has struggled feeling like she or he does not belong or that his or her
Mm.
writing is not good enough? What would you say to that student?
I would say that, you know, look up some of that history of education.
Mm,
There's a reason you feel like you don't belong. There are uh, things outside of your power that have made you possibly feel that way. So
mhm.
you do belong. And not only do you belong, but you're needed
You're
in
needed.
this space, particularly if you understand that feeling of not belonging. Because that to me is kind of is the future of education at
Mhm.
large, but higher education in particular. That's where the conversations are going. Just I would say, like it worked for me, go through the community networks, get to know people, ask everybody all the questions, like no matter who they are and where they work. within the scope of the space that you're occupying. Get to know everybody and hear their thoughts and their opinions, and um, file it away and start to intentionally construct your steps.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you going to do next? And that might not look like the path that other people took. And
Yeah.
probably if it doesn't, you're probably doing something right.
Very nice. I love that advice. Yeah. And I think if we look at everything that you've shared today, it's a true testimonio,
Yeah,
testament to the perseverance and, your resilience and saying, okay, they're telling me no, but I'm
yeah,
going to go anyway. I'm
yeah,
going to try it anyway. I
right.
love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Last question that I'm always like curious about because I was asked this question not too long ago and I didn't know what to say. I never thought about it. But if your profession was not a teacher,
Mm.
I think I kind of know the answer, but
Yeah.
what would you be instead?
I would be an artist and a writer. I would probably I'd love to imagine myself like a Roxanne Gay, Ta-Nehisi.
Yes, yes, I love
The
that.
talent level is there. However, I I mean, doing both the cultural criticism
Hmm.
and the fictional work, but like Rupi Kaur, like that poet who
Hmm.
fuses her drawings with her writing, like
Oh
that
yeah.
kind of a thing would also so that somehow that kind of interwoven, like this idea that you can I'd be a creative,
Hmm.
know,
I love that.
someone who
Yes.
creates things, including documentaries and short films.
That's amazing. I think that would be a very good subgenre that, I don't think has been explored and,
Yeah,
popular as many other subgenres and genres in general. So I would
yeah,
love to read that. And I think you should definitely come up with a memoir too, because, you have so much to share and there's a lot, that happens that a lot of us can identify with,
yeah.
definitely. So I would be the first one, I would be
All right.
reading Rosie's and then yours, and I
Yeah.
would bring them to the classroom. We'll be talking about your work.
Well, I mean, it would be cool. I love the ideas of I went to this museum in Berkeley, and they
Hmm.
had the screen up, and it was 100 small screens, and
Hmm.
each screen was just videotaping someone for 24 hours, and they were all playing simultaneously.
Hmm.
And so I love those kinds of anthologized ideas. So it would almost be kind of cool if we all we wrote a collective memoir, like memoir
Yes,
of teaching, singular, but it's a memoir through all of us.
I love that. Let's do it.
Yeah, right?
That's an amazing project. Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah, maybe we could just start it as a blog somehow or something in a virtual space and
Right.
see how it goes.
And then take it from there,
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Let's get on it.
Okay. We
Great.
don't have enough to do. Let's
No,
do
because there's nothing else to do in this,
that.
profession. So
You've got your
definitely.
podcast life going. You're a teacher. And
Yeah.
what that means for you is you're also doing 5,000 other things. So,
Yeah. But we'll have time. We'll
yes, of
figure it
course
out.
we will. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this
No, thank
interview.
you.
I loved it. I cannot wait to be talking with you
Yes.
soon, either as a podcast or as another interview. But also, I'm hoping that soon we can actually run into each other on the
Yes.
hallway and then have our little conversations as well.
Yes. Yes. And if we're all vaccinated, I hope to be able to give you a big hug.
Yes, but I will send you one right now,
Yes.
and to your husband and your daughter as well. And
Yes.
I cannot wait to talk with you again.
Yes, you too.
Thank you so much, and I will see you soon.
Okay.